Hi, friends. I'm Scott. It's great to see you, and thanks for joining me again today for another episode of the companion podcast in support of the film Skin on Skin, The Rise and Fall of the World's Largest Furrier, Part 2. It's coming soon, and I can't wait for you to see the continuing saga of the 70-year history of the people, places, things, and events at the Evans Fur Company. Between its founding in 1929 by A.L. Meltzer and its demise some 70 years later in 1999 after a series of events and internal struggles that brought the company down. Today we're going to Hollywood land, friends, some celebrity stories that we've strung together for you from all of the different podcasts, all of the different interviews, all of the different encounters that I've had with people discussing the Evans Fur Company. But first, let's take a look at how we got here, as my lifelong friend and the narrator of the films, Michael Idless, catches us up on the first film and gets us to the point leading us up to where the second film begins.
I'm Michael Idless, and this is Skin on Skin, The Rise and Fall of the World's Largest Furrier, Part 2. So let's review. We have Rose Walcove being sold to Julius Meltzer when still a spinster at age 29. They're coming to America first class, on the backs of her wealthy Trans-Siberian Railroad engineer brothers. Rose's depression sending her reeling and eventually to bed, to stay. Julius can't support the family, so oldest sons A.L. and Herman leave school to go to work. Oldest daughter Thelma is sent to finishing school to learn to care for them all. Brother Herman assists Brother A.L. and his wife Minerva in the startup of Evans Furs, only for Herman to go into a slow, lifelong depression, clearly a result of the lack of parenting from Rose and Julius. Brother-in-law Harold Sussman and his wife, oldest daughter Thelma, are sent to Boston to expand the company east. Thelma never forgives her brothers for the move away from the family. And let's not forget A.L.'s son David. Oh, David, the crown prince who would wear the crown alone in his own personal cocoon that he himself created. Loved by those who worked for him, admonished by family for his selfish and narcissistic ways. Along the way, a fur company empire is built, and the Meltzers thrive while at the same time suffering the consequences of their parents' abandonment as tragedy checks in for an extended stay. As we recounted, from the moment they began selling squirrel scarves in 1929, Evans Furs seldom knew from tough times. What A.L. Meltzer had hit upon was growing and growing, and the business kept moving forward. Which leads us to part 2, and the term, when you get to the top of the highest peak, there's only one direction you can go.
Okay, so Larry Becker and I got together again recently and swapped a bunch more stories. You know what's interesting to me about all this, and I think Larry would agree, is that the more we remember, the more we remember. And we're pulling things out of the recesses of our minds, in some cases, things we haven't thought about for decades. But these are times that influenced us internally while we were at the Evans Fur Company, just back there in the subconscious. And like I said, the more we discuss, the more we remember. So Larry and I, to start us off, discussed an after Evans celebrity involvement he had with the one and only Rock and Roll Hall of Famer and lead singer of the Isley Brothers, Ronald Isley.
It was called Mr. Biggs. And this was like mid 90s, early to mid 90s. Ron Isley. Although, actually, it's not an Evans story because that's when I was in.
Well, let's hear it
PBS.
anyways. Go for it. Just tell us it's a good story. Let's hear it.
Okay, so one of my customers got the idea. They were doing, it was Tendler Furs. Tendler Furs had the idea that they were going to brand Tendler Furs by branding big celebrity lines. So they did the Beyonce line. They did the line for Ron Isley of the Isley Brothers. That was the Mr. Biggs collection, and it was a real hip hop men's fur collection, and it really was pretty cool. And I'll tell you, I mean, as I've told you before, at this point, I guess I wasn't as starstruck anymore, but I was always pretty.
Can I say also at this point, Ron Isley's an older guy, but I imagine he's a rediscovered star amongst the upcoming hip hop scene and everything, right?
Well, at the time, he was preparing to go to jail because because he had when it was all four brothers, I think, the Isley brothers.
Right. Here, let me look. I'm keep talking. I'm going to look this up while you talk. Go ahead.
One of them passed, and it appears as if Ron had been the recipient of his checks and decided to, I don't know, he was cashing his dead brother's checks or something. And he had just gotten married to Candy, who was his I think still his wife. And we were at the Las Vegas Magic Show, featuring.
Oh yeah, I've been there. Yep.
We were premiering his line, his collection. So he was there doing a little PR, and we have dinner at the Mirage Hotel because there was like I don't know, call it a victory dinner. And Larry and Steve Tendler, we were staying at the MGM, and Larry and Steve Tendler told me, meet us downstairs in 10 minutes. We're going over to the hotel. And it was me, Larry, Steve, Ron Isley, his wife Candy, and I think he had some sort of business manager or something.
Okay, so this is like 2008 or 2009 because he got out of jail in 2010. I'm looking at an article that says he picks up right where he left off on tour.
Yeah. That was about the time. No. That was after he came out of jail. This was by 2009. I was already 10 years into Dicker and Dicker.
Oh, okay.
This was probably 1998, 1999.
Wow, so he went to jail. I'll have to look up. He went to jail for a few years there.
A couple of years. Yeah, a couple of years. P.S. We are heading over to the hotel in the limousine, a big stretch limo, which is not unusual in Vegas. But what was unusual is we were going to the Mirage Hotel, and we didn't go into the front. We went in to this like secret entrance. We walked through the kitchen to get, to our spot. It was like very cool. I must say, it was like, being shuffled around so that nobody saw Ron Isley. Then we're in the middle, in the restaurant, we're in the middle of the room, and everybody was coming over. And I can tell you, it was one of the most exciting dinners. Just listening to this man talk,
Well, he's
which
Ronald
was
damn Isley. I mean, come on.
right away I went out and got every Isley Brothers CD. I really and truly I enjoyed being that close and actually communicating. Like I was lighting up the table that night. It was just a lot of fun, and I was with friends, and then I don't know, it was again another part of my, I'll call it, storied career, because I just had so much fun doing everything that was my business, that was my life, my career. And I'll wind it around by saying, thank you, Evans, because they gave me the exposure, the confidence, the education to be able to go out and, be the guy that I was. There was a point in time where I used to see people point at me all the time, especially in Hong Kong, like at the fairs. You'd see people from all over the world. And I think probably it was because I would hold up the program where I'd advertise on the back cover with my face on it. But it was like I became recognized as somebody in the industry. And I started out as a kid, and then I ended up, oh, there's that old man, Larry Becker. It was a beautiful thing.
Diane Jones was a salesperson, and she was somebody who had her thumb on the pulse of all of Chicago when she worked on the third floor in Evans in downtown. And we all had a lot of fun when celebrities came in, and Diane had a affinity, shall we say, for NBA players. And one day, her favorite, somebody with legs up to the sky, all the way to heaven, came in, and that's about all she could focus on when this famous Chicago Bulls player came in looking for a fur coat.
The biggest part of me is when Reggie Theus walks up in there. You love him. I love Reggie. I loved him so Reggie.
I remember every woman in fun. No, but Diane would get fluttered over it.
Right, I would. It would. And then when they say Reggie Theus is on his way down to the first line, and I was like, oh my God, I ain't gonna be able to do this. And he walked up in there, and he had these two little shorts on. All I could see was just legs. And I was like, oh my God, I'll fit the faint. That's what I told her. And so I came out, and they let me take him back there where Mr. Fields' office was. We was all the way in the back. And he said, I want me a fur coat. And I sold him a fur coat. He got a jacket first, but he wanted a long crossbox coat made down to his ankle. I said, no problems. So and you remember Gretchen?
Yep. The designer?
The designer?
Yep. Yeah.
Gretchen came in there. I thought she was going to fall out. Because she had to measure him. She said, Diane, he's so handsome. I said, I know, Gretchen, but just take his measurement. Gretchen did. I said, just take it off. But see, when he got the coat made, and he brought his girlfriend in there. She was a very, very pretty black girl. And he bought her a blue fox coat. And I say, you know what?
That was a token.
Yeah, but a token wasn't nothing. So when he got that crossbox coat made, I said, why would you have a coat look like you're looking with a crossbox coat on and bring your girlfriend in with a blue fox jacket? He said, what that mean? I said, it's not cool. He said, what you mean it ain't cool? I said, you need to buy her a mink coat. If you're going to let her stand beside you, she needs to stand beside you. She don't need to look like a blue fox coat anybody can have. That's what I told her.
Give you another one. So there's an actress, Joanna Gleason. She happens to be Monty Hall's daughter. All right. Monty Hall is the guy that launched Dicker and Dicker of Beverly Hills for his friend Mac Dicker. I mean, it all started on a golf course, that relationship. So Joanna Gleason and Monty Hall's wife never, ever were charged for storage. Ever. I mean, it would have been an insult. So I certainly was not going to charge them for storage. I get a call. Joanna lived in New York. Again, most of the people in California, they hardly took their stuff out. It just stayed in storage. It was
Right,
very
but the
easy business.
slightest little thing sets off the fuse. It's unbelievable with these people.
Okay, well, again, now remember, this coat. I was still in business. I was only in business a couple of years, but I don't know. Again, I don't know how long Alan Shea had it in storage. You know what I mean? So she calls for it. I get the coat out of my cold storage, and I see this 100 rips. Now it was a sheared rabbit coat it was lined, not lined, reversible. I know the coat. It was from A12 Almiro. It was a microfiber outside, and it had sheared rabbit on the inside, and it had this passementerie trim on the outside with a one skin fox tuxedo. I knew the coat. We had hundreds of them at Evans. And I'm looking at the coat, and I said to her, I says, we have a problem. And the first thing I said, she goes, oh, damn it. I needed it I think she was in like one of the parades or something. She needed the coat to wear. And I said, don't worry. I'm going to send you a coat that you can wear. And I sent her a beautiful sheared mink, reversible to taffeta. It was something that was contemporary, and everything was perfect, right? She gets the coat. She thanked me profusely. Now she says, well, what are you going to do about my coat? Because now I'm the one that ripped her coat.
Right.
You know what I mean? Now I just had it in storage, not charging her. But again, that name that hung over my door that was everything. My reputation was everything. So here's what I did. Again, having the experience that I had in Hong Kong, I knew who made those pieces 20 years ago. I knew who made it. So I contacted them. I asked if they would do me a big favor after they laughed at me and said, making a 20-year-old garment? After they laughed at me and agreed to do it, now I get on the phone with Joanna. And I said to her, I'm able to make it. I says, by the good grace of God, I'm able to make it. I said, but here's my situation. If I make it out of the sheared rabbit, it's going to fall apart again. I says, the fur that I sent you, the sheared mink? I says, why don't we make it out of sheared
Yeah, but
mink?
who's paying for it?
She did.
Okay. I just want to make sure she says
that was a good sell. Nice.
Don't be ridiculous. I mean, again, at that point, if she would have said no to it, she would have had a sheared rabbit.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because I did promise to do it, but it was a way that, again, I didn't make a profit, but I retrieved what I did. Actually, I did make a profit because I remember she sent me, there was a box that came from UPS. The fucking driver was off for 2 weeks afterwards on disability because he hurt his back. It was from the 2nd Avenue Deli in New York.
Oh, nice.
Oh my God, it was filled with, there had to be 50 pounds of just good shit from the 2nd Avenue Deli.
Wow.
Again, it's about relationship and keeping that relationship, keeping the doors open. I just wish, does anybody want to buy any Dicker and Dicker labels?
It's so good. So my favorite story that we're going to tell you today involves an encounter, an odyssey, and a caper that I had with Diane Jones, who was in Chicago, as I said, involved Larry Becker, who has a different telling of it, and involved stops in Chicago and Los Angeles, Beverly Hills, as well as up by the ranch where the A-Team is filmed and shot. And this was an encounter that I will never forget. In fact, some of what Diane is going to tell you in her segment of the story amazes me and makes me turn blush to this day. And so here I've weaved together the manner in which Larry Becker and myself and Diane Jones tell the story of Mr. T, Hulk Hogan, and the skunk-striped hooded mink coats.
Mr. T was a bouncer at one of these a lounge that I went to school with. Calvin Hollins. It was at the Deanback, and he was a bouncer, but his look was a mohawk and had as much jewelry as he possibly could put around his neck. That was his look. So Sylvester Stallone discovered Mr. T at some kind of event, and the event was how far you could throw a midget. Sylvester Stallone saw him throw these midgets across the room. And so he invited Mr. T to being in wrestling. He did both. He did boxing and he did wrestling. But the wrestling part, he told me, he said, he came to me because I know him because one of the people I know in life, that's my husband, he was a district manager selling jewelry at Rogers and Holland. So I knew him. I knew of him. So he came down there. He said, I want me a white mink coat all the way down to the floor with a black stripe coming all the way down to the floor. I said, okay. So we're going to have to make it. He said, fine. So we made him the fur coat. And he was living in Chicago in a suburb. And the people made him mad because he was trying to put up a fence that they wouldn't allow him to put the fence up because it was too high. So he chopped down the damn trees in the back on his property. He chopped all the trees down and they put his ass on TV. And the people were mad at him because he chopped the trees down. So the next day we had a fitting for him. He came in there. He had his whole face covered up all the way down to his ankle. And he came in there and he had to do a fitting. And I say, why didn't you chop them damn trees down? He said, because they wouldn't let me put the damn fence up. So I chopped all the trees down. But they were really, really mad at him. Really mad at him. So we did the fitting and he told me, don't tell nobody who I am. I said, I don't want to tell nobody who you are because they might try to do. He came on State Street. He came on the first one. Then he left.
I could remember being in Chicago when he was buying. I'm sure it had to be when he was buying those coats, the skunk coats. Yep. He bought a black one with a white stripe and a white one with a black stripe, and we had to make these fez type hats that to match. And he must have come into the store 3 times, for because it was all custom. And I remember and this is, of course, during the time where he was at the peak of his celebrity status, right? He's a Chicago boy. And, here he is. And he's in a room, they brought him into the room like on the 5th floor where we used to have like the conference in the back by Sam Field's office, not one of the other, fitting booths. And I don't know, there were other people in the store, one of which was this young, I'd say a woman in her 30s, maybe 40, young black woman with her 2 sons. And they were little kids. And they see Mr. T and they went running up. And, I was one of the people that was working with him. It was like, I think I was getting coffee at the time. But, it was like, we're all catering to him and this. And here's 2 young black kids that come up, they're his Dr. J, and come up to him and say, oh, Mr. T, could you order? He goes, can't you see I'm busy? And it was like, whoa. I stopped watching the A-Team. I really did. It's like, Not the nicest man. He wasn't the nicest man. But
Well,
we did charge him. We did charge him a shitload for those coats.
that's funny.
I said, why are you so damn rude? I said, you know what? That don't make no sense. But he did. He did that. And he wouldn't give the kids no autograph. And he left. He really did. He left. And then he called back and he said, I'm getting ready to go to Hollywood and I need you to bring the coat to Hollywood for me. I said, why can't I ship it to you? He said, I want you to personally deliver me the coat. So I said, okay. So I went back there and I told Mr. Marks and Robert K. Robert K said, okay, you can deliver the coat. I said, well, where am I going? You know what he told me? He said, you can stay with Scott Hunter.
Oh, that sounds like my family springing the sprinkler roof roar.
Yeah, I said, that's okay. I'm going to go and stay with my aunt because she lives in Santa Monica.
This is just one of those moments you never forget, right? So I'm in LA. I'm Larry Friedman's assistant. It's the mid-'80s. Things are pretty good, nothing to complain about. I get a call out of the blue from Chicago, a familiar voice going, Scott Hunter! And it's Diane Jones. And she tells me that she's just made this sale to Mr. T. They sold him these two ginormous mink coats with hoods with skunk stripes going down the back of both of them. One was white mink with a black stripe, and the other was ranch, which is black mink with a white stripe.
He bought two mixed coats, one with a white one with a black stripe. Matter of fact, I have a picture of it. I have a white one. He bought a white one with a black stripe. And then Diane went to California to deliver it to him. So he was a nice guy. He was a nice guy. We had a lot of celebrities.
And she says, I'm coming out to LA to deliver them. That's what he wants me to do. And I'm like, okay, great. What do you need me to do to help? She goes, but don't worry. I told Robert K, I'm not staying with you. And I was like, what? Well, she was welcome to stay with me, but I don't know. It's just nuts. So anyways, Diane comes out to LA and I get her and meet her.
That's all. Me and Scott go to take the coat up there to Mr. T. We go up some stairs. Mr. T standing at the door. We was on Rodeo Drive. And he said, who is that white boy you got with me? That ain't no white boy. I said, that is Scott Hunter. Just said, who is that white boy you got with you? And then I said, that's Scott Hunter. He works with me. He's half owner of the company. That's what I told him. So he led us upstairs.
Go to Rodeo Drive. I don't remember if it was his studio or apartment or a workspace, what he had there. But it was his on Rodeo Drive. And we walk in with the coats and the boxes. They're huge. I mean, I was probably carrying both of them because they were bigger than she was. And he goes, who's the white boy? And I'm like, oh my God. Nobody could have said anything to make me feel more uncomfortable at that moment than that, I don't think. And Diane's like, that's Scott Hunter. He owns the company. I'm like, oh God, now you're making it worse.
And I opened the refrigerator here and had shit in there to eat. I said, well, where your food at? He said, I don't eat no food. That's what he told me.
So anyways, they clearly knew each other from Chicago, and I had not been a part of the transaction back there, so I didn't know what was going on. He's trying the coats on, and I'm making a couple of adjustments to it here and there. And Diane is nosing around and poking into everything. She's opening cabinets, and by the time he goes, what you doing? Get out of there. She's in his refrigerator, and she goes, how come you ain't got nothing in here to eat? And I was like, oh my God.
But then he told me and Scott, I say, where are you fit to go? He said, I'm going on the 18th. And he said, if you want to come, you and Scott can come out there. He invited us both out there.
So anyways, he says to us, I got to go. You guys make the alterations. And if you want, you can bring the coats to me tomorrow up at the A-team. So I get the coats back downtown, get the few, there were minor alterations made.
And so me and Scott went out there, and I looked up. It was somebody riding up on a motorcycle.
And the next day, Diane and I go up to this ranch. God, I can't remember the name of it, but it was almost at the Grapevine, like it was past Ventura. And this huge ranch, set ranch, where they had all kinds of sets and filming and everything. And we get let in and we get escorted into Mr. T's trailer. And eventually he comes in and he starts trying on the coat. And I remember it was the white one with the black stripe is the one he's wearing. And all of a sudden you hear the loud, and I mean the loudest, it must have been a Harley, motorcycle roar that you've ever heard, coming up the hill. His trailer, all the trailers were like on the top of this little hill.
And they had long blonde hair. And I was like to myself, who in the hell is that? And that was Hulk Hogan and his wife. You remember that?
Oh, yeah. I told the story.
And off the back of the bike gets Hulk Hogan and his wife. And they come into this trailer and he walks in and he's fucking huge. I thought T is huge. He's huge. The two of them, like you feel like, yikes, Land of the Giants when you're around them. He walks in and Mr. T is trying on the white coat and he looks at Diane. He looks at me. He looks at Mr. T. And he burst out laughing. I'll never forget the howl of the laugh.
Because he just couldn't believe that Mr. C was going to walk on the wrestling stage with that long mink coat on. I don't even know if he still got that coat. I was trying to beg for me one of those gold chains in there. He said, get out of my trailer. You can't even give me one? He said, Diane, get out of my trailer. You're not getting it. He put me out. But I was dealing with Mr. T.
Things calm down for a moment or finally after a moment or two. And Mr. T turns to him, and this is the line I'll never forget. And I've told this to Diane. He turns to Hulk Hogan, whose name is Terry, and he goes, Terry, I'd like to introduce you to my Furriers. And it's just a day I'll never forget. As somebody who grew up in the late 60s and 70s, John Lennon will forever be in my heart. Sometimes I just think about what brilliance he might still be churning out, or would he have disappeared from society in protest with what's going on in the world today? Well, before cell phones and before computers, Larry Becker was near the Dakota Apartments and just couldn't resist wanting to see one of rock history's most famous tragic places.
What year did Lennon die? Was it 90?
John Lennon died in 1980. Go ahead, that album here. I'll tell you right now.
80. Yeah, it was 80, not 90.
Because that album came out in Double Fantasy was 1980.
Okay. So the year that he died, he died in the summer, right?
December 1980, he died. And by the way, just so you know, so I'm just going to interdict for a second here. My favorite artist, still to this day, and at the time, was Todd Rundgren. And when Mark David Chapman was arrested, whenever he was arrested, a day or two later, he was wearing a Todd Rundgren T-shirt.
Oh, he was next. Maybe he was next. Well, in any case,
he was a big fan, one of them. So,
in any case, this is months later after he was assassinated, and we were in those days. The buyers would spend weeks at a time in New York. In the summertime, we would have, it was either 3 weeks or a month that we were in the Middletown Hotel. It was good surroundings. Everything was good. We worked 6 days a week. And on that 7th day, we got to really let loose.
We rested.
Yeah, we didn't rest. Anyway, we got this idea that we were going to have a contest. We're going to walk out of our hotel and just do a big circle around uptown and go into every bar we could find. And this was starting at like 10 a.m. go into every bar we could find, and we were just drinking margaritas. And our contest was who uptown serves the best margarita. Well, I guess it was about 4 o'clock or so, and we had done our circle, our loop, and we were looped, all of us. And we ended up at a bar that was right across the street from the Dakota, and where John Lennon and Yoko Ono lived, and where he was shot. He was shot right in front of his apartment. The gates to his apartment, or the entryway. And now it was, that building had such high security because they had gates at the street level, at the sidewalk level to get in. And then there was the security gate. So you had to be let in to get to security.
No,
And
it was all celebrities that lived in that building at the time, and still do.
Celebrities and captains of industry, just uber wealthy people. And there was no Uber at the time. Anyway, make a long story short, we're all fucked up, but I mean fucked up. We had been drinking since 10 o'clock, and I don't think any of us had any food in us. And I get the brilliant idea to ask the security guard to show us where John Lennon was shot.
Oh, God.
And I don't know, by the good grace of God, he agreed. He was a young guy. I could still see him. He was wearing the uniform. It looked like maybe he was a size 36. And the guy before him that gave him that uniform was a 42. He had a hat that was like coming over his eyes. And he leads us right up to where he was shot. And it was like, I said, can I lay down in the spot? Marty Cohn is like chalking me out, and I don't know if there are pictures, because I don't think there were pictures. If anybody had pictures, it would have been Myron, because he would have been the only one that would have carried a camera. You know what I mean? It's like you didn't have cameras on your phones. You didn't, it was different times.
Well, when we finally track him down, we'll ask him, because we found the Mr. T mink coat picture. So
there you go. Who provided that?
Mark.
Unbelievable. Anyway, yeah, it was a pretty spectacular day of, again, just, we were working like dogs. We were working 6 days a week and away from home. This was just a great release day that I will always, always remember.
In this next vignette, Diane Jones in Chicago tells us about some encounters with celebrity mayors, former mayors of Chicago, Harold Washington, who was the first black mayor of the city, and son of Chicago scion, Richie Daley, who was also a mayor after his father, Mayor Richard J. Daley, who, as we all know, was the famous mayor of Chicago. And Diane Jones recounts a couple of stories of parties that we had where the mayors came along. Evans was very big in the community, big in charities, big using fur and fashion shows to make a statement. And that was just another way for us to be involved in many of the goings-on around Chicago.
Walter Payton came up in there.
Yep.
He was up in there, So the people, and when I met Harold Washington, they shut the whole floor down. And Robert K came up to me. He said, "You want to stay for the party?" I said, "What party?" He said, Harold Washington is coming on the floor, and I'd like for you to stay. And I said, "Sure, I wanted to stay." Me and Harold Washington kicked it. And then they invited me on Michigan Avenue when they had the gate. When they had, they was giving a fundraiser for the AIDS victims. And I met Mayor Daley, because he came over there. And Edna told me, "You're going to stay here?" I said, "Yeah, I'm going to stay here." She said, "Well, they have AIDS." I said, "Edna, I don't care what they have. It's not going to pass down to you." Because they turned the kitchen into like a restaurant, and we had everything. We had hors d'oeuvres and everything in there. we was on Michigan Avenue when they did the fundraiser for the for that event. We was over there. I was lucky to be over there for that.
The year after, when the Bears won the Super Bowl, we put on just an amazing charity event at the Michigan Avenue store with the Super Bowl Bears and their wives. A calendar was shot. Nick was actually in the calendar as a baby with Tommy Thayer crawling up to him. I mean, we had some fun. Are you kidding? That was just and it made money, and we sold furs. I mean, it was just glorious. And talk about being welcomed by the community. Oh, I mean, listen, Mayor Daley would show up at all of our events. I mean, I put on a huge event at the store, too, for AIDS, a couple of them, and all kinds of other charities. And it was no problem. I mean, I could just get on the horn myself and call the mayor's office, and Daley would be there. The head of Marshall Fields would be there. We were on the State Street Council. I mean, I was a Meltzer. I did everything possible to enhance the business and be kind and gracious to everyone because David and Cheryl were traveling. So it was my job to be that person. So there were some really fun parts of it. I mean, Bob and I were invited to glorious events. He was part of Young Presidents Organization, which still goes on. And it was, we had some really good times.
I'll tell you a great story that relates exactly to that. So again, it's all about customer service. You're only as good as their last experience. You know what I mean? So you have to keep that up.
Right. You could get it right for 1,000 times, and on the 1,001st time you fuck it up, you fucked it up, and that's what they know.
Right. And just like how I said before, I gained confidence because of what I knew. Well, it's also who you know is going to get you in those doors. Right. So one of my customers that I took over when I bought Dicker and Dicker of Beverly Hills was a service customer with the last name Scully. It was Vin Scully's wife. All right.
Very nice. Yeah.
The sound of the Los Angeles Dodgers, one of the most, I mean, everybody listens to what, Vin says. Anyway, I was going out of business now. Now, I took it over in 2000. I bought the brand and I took all of the service in 2002. Now it's 2019 and I advertise I'm going out of business. Now, his wife had, I want to say, a dozen furs in storage. And every year, she would take out, a couple of them. And, she wouldn't come into the store. We would deliver and pick up. And we're now going out of business. So she sends Vin in, because I wanted every person to come into that store and buy something. And she sends Vin in to pick. She ordered, the furs out of storage.
Could you do a voiceover for my store while you're here, please, Mr. Scully?
No, I asked him for more than that. Trust me. Anyway, I asked him for it after, and you'll understand why. So he came in. I brought every piece. He had the biggest trunk of a Mercedes-Benz that I have ever seen. And it looked, when he drove away, it looked as if he was driving, with his hands over the steering wheel, no head. And all I could tell you is he lived in Lake Sherwood, which was 40 minutes from Beverly Hills. He gets home with all the coats. And, at the time, I was running the sale. At the time, I had 1 million people in the store and everybody. He was just so nice to everybody. And he's just the most wonderful guy. And we're all drinking champagne and everything is good. About an hour and 45 minutes later, I hear that car pull right back up. into my parking lot.
That always sucks when you see him coming back in shortly thereafter.
Yeah, an hour and 45 minutes later, and he's like 80 something years old, and not the happiest fella.
Well, because it took him that long to get home to the Hollywood Hills and then back down to Beverly, to Wilshire and Robertson.
Now I said, "What's up, Vin? Did we forget something?" And he says, "Can you please come out to the car?" And I go out to the car, and there's only one piece. And he goes, "I'm not. I can't remember her name." He goes, "My wife said that this is not her jacket." And I said, "Oh shit!" I said, "We're so busy. We got 1 million people in the store now." And I said, come inside. I took the jacket inside. I open it up. I open up the jacket. It's got her monogram in there, her signature monogram. And the jacket had to be, I'll tell you how old it was. It had the 90 cuff, the sweetheart cuff. Remember, it was an upside down heart. Well, all I can tell you is, I said, "Vin, this is her jacket." And he goes, "She swears up and down that this is not her piece." I said, "But look." And he looks and he goes, "Oh my God." And he calls her and he's on the phone with her. And he was a good salesman, I thought. And he says, "She doesn't want that jacket. That's not hers." And he says, I says, "You can see it's the monogram." She said, "Well, you monogrammed it with my signature." And I'm like, "Why would I do it? It was a storage jacket. It had been, and it was one of the pieces that she didn't take out. So she had it in storage for 15, 17 years. God knows how long she had it in at Dicker and Dicker. I took it from them, from Alan's,
His garage, probably.
his
His
kid's
garage.
bedroom, from his kid's bedroom. Anyway, I'm like, what do I do? I mean, and it didn't take me too long. I said to Vin, I says, "All right." I said, "I promise you, this is her piece, but you have been, a proud supporter of Dicker and Dicker of Beverly Hills for God knows how long." I says, "Can you bring her in? I want her to come in, let her pick out a new jacket." And he did.
That's great.
And now this woman came in. I swear to God, she was giving me the Malokia. She had the evil eye in her pocket. It was really bad. By the time she left, she was hugging and kissing me and telling me what a great businessman I was. I mean, the bottom line, she didn't trust me. I'm sitting in the back earlier, sewing in her name, and now all of a sudden, now again, it was all on me. All right. I mean, I did end up, she didn't take her jacket. I ended up selling it as a used jacket, during the sale. I got something, I retrieved something. But at the end of the day, I didn't have somebody screaming.
Okay, so I got a good one for you. So who is the biggest celebrity related to Evans Furs? And I think I have the answer. So when I was a teenager, my first job was at Evans Furs at First Kennedy's, which was just a very short time because they were already in the process of moving. And then we moved over to Jordan Marsh. And every day after school, I would get on the T, which is the trolley system in Boston, and go from Newton to downtown Boston to my job at Evans Furs at Jordan Marsh, where I was the stock boy and I would check in and check out these storage and cleaning coats for customers that brought them in for us to service. And there was a group of salespeople there, most of whom had worked there for 20 years and 30 years, and one of them for 40 years. They worked for my grandfather, Harold Sussman, when he was in charge. They worked for Frank Riccio, his assistant, after my grandfather moved on to run our Coslos operation in Texas. It was a loyal, well-versed group of killer salespeople. They would claw your eyes out to get their sale and their commission, as they were taught by my grandfather, who was taught by A.L. Meltzer. So, one of the ladies who worked there at the Evans Furs at Jordan Marsh business that we had, her name was Hazel Consalvi. And Hazel was a lovely, lovely woman. She was kind of a surrogate mother to me in that she would always pull me aside and ask me how I was doing and give me motherly advice, whether I wanted it or not. She had 2 children, a son, Brian, who I became very friendly with. Brian was a great, 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 great guy. Gentle soul, beautiful, beautiful boy. And he and I were quite good friends. We bonded over our love of cannabis. Hazel also had a daughter who she was so proud of and so much loved by the name of Dale Consalvi. Now, Hazel herself had a troubled life. She was a bit of a free spirit. She was unwilling to be tied down by the normal bonds of marriage and motherhood, and thus she and her husband, Eddie Consalvi, divorced. Hazel went off on her own, continuing to work for my grandfather for years and years and years before she got remarried. And Hazel would regale us and keep us posted on the ongoings of her daughter, Dale Consalvi. In 1975, Dale Consalvi was named Playboy Playmate of the Year, Play Bunny of the Year, I guess you would call it, at the Playboy Club in downtown Boston. She was an incredibly beautiful, sexy little girl. She stood about 5 feet tall, skinny as a rail, and she had a beauty and a Hollywood likeness that harkened back to the days of Marlena Dietrich and Greta Garbo and folks like that. Dale Consalvi soon went out to Hollywood, where she went to the Playboy Mansion and was interviewed by Hugh Hefner. And shortly thereafter, Dale Consalvi, our Dale Consalvi, and Hazel used to, as I said, regale us constantly with what was going on in her daughter's life. Dale Consalvi then ran into and met Frank Zappa, one of our friggin' heroes, Frank Zappa. And next thing we know, out comes this album, Joe's Garage. And lo and behold, who's the female vocal player? I think the character was Mary, playing Mary throughout the whole album. Our own Dale Consalvi. Well, another one of the guys in the band was a drummer, quite frankly, one of the best drummers in the fucking world, if you want my opinion. His name was Terry Bozzio. Terry Bozzio played with Zappa, an amazing drummer, and you can see where the story is going. Terry Bozzio and Dale Consalvi fell in love and became Mr. and Mrs. Terry Bozzio. And after a short time, Dale and Terry, along with Warren Cucurullo and Patrick Ahern, other guys that they had met in Frank Zappa's orbit, all left the band to form their own, a band called Missing Persons. And Dale Bozzio and Terry Bozzio and Missing Persons had one hit after another in the period between 1980 and 1985. Words, No More Words, Mental Hopscotch, Destination Unknown, Walking in LA. It was one after another, hit after hit after hit. And all I can tell you is that Hazel Consalvi was the most proud woman you had ever seen. And so I would say that Dale Bozzio and Missing Persons would be the link to the biggest celebrities associated with somebody who worked at the Evans Fur Company. Diane Jones in Chicago talks about another fun encounter she had and one that made her a flutter when Michael Jordan came into the store.
When Michael Jordan walked on Michigan Avenue, I was working with Wally Donko. He walked through that door, and I said, that looked like Michael Jordan. And he was with Diane and her mother. He was a rookie. I thought I was gonna fall out there. He bought Diane not a female mink coat. He bought her an inexpensive mink coat. He bought her one. They picked it, and that was the last time I saw Michael Jordan, when he bought her that mink coat.
And in our final vignette telling of the day, I've got one for you that involves Dr. J, Julius Irving, Walt Clyde Frazier, Marv Albert, NBA legends and broadcasting legend, the Evans Fur Company out in Woodfield, Las Vegas and the casinos, and a young 13-year-old boy's experience at camp, all told through the eyes of our one and only producer and partner in this film project, Larry Becker.
Yeah, can I tell you a story that will always be in my heart? And we've had so many discussions about, like our times together and our times, at Evans independently. And this is one I don't think I ever told you. And it's funny, I thought about it because I'm thinking about the times that you had asked me about celebrities, like who's the, the most exciting. And I did have a couple of really good ones. And then I started thinking, for some reason, I started going back to the beginning of my time at Evans, because, getting ready for the legacy part, again, Lenny Jonas is somebody that I consider to be sort of a surrogate dad. I mean, I had the best dad in the world, but I had this guy also treating me like a son, watching over me like a son, So I started thinking about the time there, and between Lenny Jonas and Marty Cohn was his assistant. It was almost like the Three Stooges to me. It was great times. It really and truly was great times. And great because I was enjoying them and learning because these guys were willing to share.
But it was those times were just a party.
Yeah,
exactly. I think in the last podcast or the one before, I talked about what we used to do on the fire escape on the 13th floor in the back of
You don't know what I used to do on the 13th floor. I had the keys to the fur hall. All right, that's another story. But anyway, here I am. I think at this point I was already 19 years old. And the NBA All-Star game was being played in Chicago that year. It was either 78 or 79. And my favorite player in the world as a kid growing up, when you're playing yourself and, you go to shoot and you say, Dr. J, I was Dr. J, Dr. J shoots, Dr. J. And as a kid, I really was into basketball. And my parents would send me in the summer months, they'd send me to Kutsher's Sports Academy in upstate New York, which was a basketball camp. And they would have professional players come in and do drills and stuff. And my greatest memory, we were playing in this tournament. It was the AIT tournament. And at halftime, in the locker room, and we were winning we were doing really well. And this was the championship of the tournament. And these two guys come in, and I mean, you noticed that they were tall, but they covered up, they had these big tins of oranges, half cut oranges for us, and, holding in front of their faces, and they go to offer it to us. One was Dr. J, and one was Walt Frazier. So I had my New York Net and my New York Knick. It was the greatest thing. But Dr. J spoke to me. You know, I was like 14 years old, 13 years old. Anyway, it's now go back, Woodfield. It's about 11 o'clock in the afternoon, in the morning.
How much longer is this? How much later?
Oh, this is like 6 years later.
Okay.
And in walks Dr. J. It's like I'm like, that's Julius Irving. I'm telling everybody, nobody knew.
Oh my God!
You know, I mean, I was a New York kid. They just knew that there's a guy that's like 7 feet coming in.
Dr. J. I mean, it was like already. How did you not know?
Well, no, I tell you, at that point, I think he was still known as Julius Irving. You know what I mean? That I don't know. I don't know that he got his doctorhood yet. Anyway, make a long story short, he comes in and he's wearing this seal on him, which was like a longer length jacket or maybe a 3/4 jacket. And he had a big tear in the back of it. And he asked if we could fix it. Now, Woodfield, I mean, we were a big store, we were a big producer. However, we didn't have a Furrier there. We had, an alterations department. You know, it was mostly ready-to-wear stuff or finishing, that they were working on. And he needed it that day. And, we said, yeah, we could do it. And I bring it, I remember I think her name was Rosita. I bring it to Rosita, and she was this short little Mexican woman. And I'm holding the coat, and it's like taller than she is.
And the weight.
I swear to God.
And the weight.
Yeah, well, no, she was a chubby little girl. Anyway, make a long story. She says to me, I have to send this to Chicago. I can't fix this. I can't. I said, can you sew it by hand? She goes, my machine won't do that. I says, can you sew it by hand? I said, it's really important. And she says she'll do it. P.S. We tell him, I tell him, I was the one that was there talking to him. And I even went on to tell him that, and I was so nervous, Scott, but I went on to tell him, I said, this is not the first time that I've met you. And I went on to tell him about when I was at Kutcher Sports Academy and he came. And I mean, he was oblivious to it. He certainly didn't remember me. I don't even know if he remembered that he was there at the time. But all I can tell you is I was just starstruck. It was like knock that one off the bucket list, right? P.S. I tell him it's going to take a while. He says, can I come back at like 2:00? And I said, I will do my best. So, because he wanted it for that, to take it. Believe me, I'm sure he wasn't staying in Schaumburg, Illinois. Right. So it's like, I'm bugging Rosita, you gotta get this done. You gotta get this done. And she didn't even have like the room to lay it out to sew it. So she asked me to put it on. I put the coat on, and again, it was a jacket on him. I put the coat on, and it's hitting the floor. The sleeves come down, like past it. And she had no room to work. So I stand on a chair. Okay. And no, I'm wearing it.
Oh, wearing it. Okay.
I'm wearing it, standing on a chair so that she can finish sewing because she had to sew from the outside. So all of a sudden I look up and we're in this little alterations room. All of a sudden I look up and there's Dr. J. And I got his coat on and I was so embarrassed, but he started laughing and, he was really a really good sport about it. At the end of the day, I think I realized why these guys have so much money is because we didn't even charge him because, we didn't do I had to tell him that this is not the proper way to do it, but this is the way that I can close it for you to have it tonight. And he gave me an autograph. I mean, I wonder if I even have that autograph. It was just on a piece of paper, but I was like so just enamored that here he was, and what a great guy, and he's going to be my hero for life. Swing forward in your part of the world. I'm in Las Vegas. I'm sitting at a blackjack table, and I always have to play third base. I wouldn't play anywhere else. For some reason, I have that's the seat that either makes or breaks the table. And I like the pressure. I like to be the guy that everybody at the end of the my game, I'm usually walking away with no money, and I've made money for everybody else at the table.
And we love you.
But exactly, and I love that part.
Yeah.
Well, here I am sitting at third base, and two guys sit down right in the middle, and one of which was Marv Albert, and the guy sitting next to him was Dr. J. I'm 50, like this is probably 15 years ago, so I'm like 50 years old. I'm the owner of Dicker and Dicker of Beverly Hills. I know Dr. J loves furs, and here I am sitting with them. And again, that setting of Las Vegas, you're having a couple of cocktails, and this was no, but trust me, this was a serious card game. So it wasn't about, like getting drunk. It was just, it was relaxing. And I don't know, I'm making every move perfectly. And everybody at the table is making money. Dr. J is giving me a high five. He almost broke my elbow because his hand came to my elbow, And I don't know, I got the guts to say to him, he says, that this is not the first time that we've ever met. And it's not the second time that we've ever met. I says, do you remember being in Chicago? You were there for the All-Star game, and you had a seal coat. And he starts looking at me, and he's like pointing his finger, and he goes, I do remember. And Scott, if I tell you, it's like I'm getting that feeling now. Either that or I still have a fever, because it's like chills. It's like chills going through my body. Imagine being that 14-year-old kid, then the 19 or 20-year-old kid, and now you're a 50-year-old man, and you're your hero, and it was really and truly all because of Evans, because again, I'm sure he didn't remember me as a kid, saying thanks for the orange, Dr. J, like the Mean Joe Green Towel commercial.
Well,
but yeah.
I just can't explain it. I'm so wrapped up in love, and I just can't contain it. All wrapped up in love. We're so wrapped up in love. We're just wrapped up in love.
The warmest of holiday wishes from Evans.
Evans Labor Day fur sale. Get them while they're hot.
And so, friends, that is a look at just some of the fun celebrity encounters that we all experienced at the Evans Fur Company. I'd like to thank you for joining me again today for this companion podcast in support of the film Skin on Skin, The Rise and Fall of the World's Largest Furrier, Part 2. It was great to go through some of these again. I laugh. One of those made me cry. I certainly blushed when Diane talked about telling Mr. T that I was half owner of this company. Funny stuff. Have a great day, everybody. We'll see you again next time and do some more digging deep into the people, places, things, and events at the Evans Fur Company between 1929, when it was begun by A.L. Meltzer, and its eventual demise in 1999. Until then, I'm Scott. Have a great day.
On the next episode of the Companion Podcast, in support of the film Skin on Skin, The Rise and Fall of the World's Largest Furrier, Part 2.
You have a fascinating music industry background.
I didn't care what I had to do to make it, to get farther than anybody else. We called it farming. I was given 100 backstage passes to find the most beautiful women. When I got into the van after this event, he yelled at me like my father never yelled at me. Who the fuck do you think I am? Richie Sambora at some tit-waving, beer-drinking teenage fucking rock show? But the cool shit went on during the show underneath the stage. I'd be like somewhere in the venue, and all of a sudden I'd hear Paul go, "Michael Adless! Michael Adless!" And I'm like, oh my God, Paul Stanley knows my name. But he never bought me a Cadillac like Elvis did. Never bought me a Cadillac. If it was Elvis, I would have gotten a couple cars, that's for sure.